Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very, very special day where we are going to bridge the gap and talk about girls' inclusivity in education. A lot of times we talk about equity, we talk about all of the different special populations that need to be included, but unless we look at each of those individual populations, we'll never get to be really equitable. So we're really excited to have some amazing, and inspiring educators and speakers here with us today. We're going to go ahead. I'd like to be mindful of your time and kick off with Pauline Rose, who's going to talk a little bit about how we define the problem. Thank you very much for being here. Pauline?
Hope you can hear me okay. Great, thank you everyone. It's great to be here and to be part of this conversation on the importance of girls' education and why we are focusing on it. So my name is Pauline Rose and I'm at the University of Cambridge, where I direct the Research for Equitable Access and Learning, the REAL Centre, and we work in countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia primarily, working with a number of different partners in universities, non-governmental organisations, together with governments on issues around girls' education, as well as other issues around intersecting disadvantage. So I'm here, I've been tasked with sort of defining the problem, and perhaps I'll also touch on a couple of potential more positive aspects after defining the problem. And I can see I've got some wonderful speakers after me who are going to also be making some really important points contributing to this discussion. I'm going to see whether I can share my screen. Let me see, it's the right one. Okay. Is it gone? It's not showing, is it? Is it showing anything?
Yes, you're fine. Thank you, Pauline. You're perfect.
Okay, so I'm seeing something different. So I hope you can see the full PowerPoint.
Girls' education defining the problem in beautiful red green. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to start by reminding us of what the commitments are, and there's good reasons why these commitments are in place. So in 2021, the group of 7 countries recommitted, I guess, to the Sustainable Development Goals that have a collective belief that 12 years of safe and quality education for all children, and specifically girls, is one of the most cost-effective and impactful social and economic investments governments and donors can make. And they further went on to say, at the forefront of our efforts will be the most marginalised and vulnerable girls, most at risk of being left behind, whether on account of poverty, disability, or the effects of conflict, displacement and natural disasters. And this intersection of different factors of disadvantage are really vital for understanding what the problem is, the extent of the problem, and therefore also identifying solutions. Now, the first part of this commitment could be seen as rather instrumental as to, should we be only focusing on girls because this is a cost-effective intervention? It obviously is important to also think about it in terms of the transformational aspects that girls' education has for the girls themselves and for their families. So I think the sort of way into this, when one's talking with politicians, with ministers of finance, etc., is to make these sorts of statements as to why there are broader benefits, but we mustn't lose sight of the main reasons of why it's important for the girls themselves. And just to say, this commitment has been recently, there's been a sort of recent study that has looked at the baseline of where we are currently in relation to the commitments that were made by this G7 in relation to this declaration. Now, I imagine we're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, and girls' education obviously cuts across the 2 Sustainable Development Goals, 4 and 5 in particular. So the one on ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now, this goal, across all of the targets in this goal, there is a commitment globally to track progress by girls and boys. So to actually identify the extent to which there are narrowing of gaps between girls and boys. And at the same time, there is the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is specifically focused on achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. So that goes back to what I was saying about, obviously, there's this interconnection between girls' education and empowerment, and these two go in two directions, that one is going to be reinforcing the other. Now, we know, and on this slide here, we know that COVID had a number of negative effects on the Sustainable Development Goals overall, as well as in relation to education specifically. And there's quite a lot of evidence that this has potentially had adverse effects on widening the gender gaps further in some contexts. And this was sometimes because when schools closed, girls had less access to remote learning, they had less access to technology and so on, and quite a few studies that have shown this, particularly in low and low middle income countries. So any of the progress that we had been making has potentially been maybe not wiped out totally, hopefully, but has been negatively affected and requires even more strident monitoring and interventions to tackle the problem. So this is actually work that we did with Antara, who I think is speaking next, so with the UN Girls Education Initiative. We were in response to sort of looking at some of the issues that the report on the G7 was coming up with that I mentioned earlier. There was quite a lot of good news in terms of gender gaps narrowing in terms of access and to some extent learning across countries. So in numerical terms, in many countries now girls are in school, maybe at least as many as boys, and in some countries there may be more girls in school than boys. And in some countries they're also their learning outcomes are at least as strong as boys, but and sometimes they're doing better than boys. However, this does not mean that we have tackled the factors that affect gender equality. There are a number of barriers that girls face more specifically than boys, or that girls face to a greater extent than boys. So I won't go through all the examples that are on here, but just to give a couple, highlight a couple of ones, we can see down the bottom in the yellow box that girls often spend many more hours a day in unpaid care and domestic work than boys of the same age, and this gap increases with age. This often means that girls either don't have the opportunity to study at home, to continue with their education outside of the school environment, and it can often mean that that their learning is affected, and perhaps they will also drop out, particularly as they get older and they reach adolescence. On the other hand, the box next to it, where we see that many young people are affected by the fact that their education is not necessarily translating them into effective employment opportunities. Again, this can affect girls more severely, who are often more likely to be in insecure work, low paid work, and facing hazards in terms of their works. So there are real issues for girls in this school to work transition as well. So there are many other issues that are on this slide, but just to say, these are some of the reasons why it's important to understand the dynamics that girls face in particular, and the dynamics between girls and boys in relation to their education. So to summarise some of these issues a bit further, and to reiterate the point that I was making, that in numerical terms, which is often referred to as gender parity, we might be seeing improvements, and that's great. We have been seeing improvements in girls and boys getting into school, but this does not equate to gender equality. It does not mean that we've seen the transformation for girls that is needed. So gender parity is often given the most attention when we see these global reports, these reports like the G7. They're sort of making often quite strident claims about, yes, we've made such progress, and maybe even claiming that we've achieved gender, narrowed the gaps in terms of gender. And this is based on these numbers of those in school and learning, but this doesn't show the full picture. So it's really important that we go beyond these literacy and numeracy, which is absolutely vital in its own right. So not to say we should not be looking at that, in as much as many children around the world are still not achieving the basics in literacy and numeracy, but that's not enough. So to give one example, in recent work that we have been doing in Ethiopia on a large scale research programme working with colleagues in Addis Ababa University, in the context of COVID, we were identifying the effects of COVID, both on children's numeracy and literacy, as well as on their socio-emotional learning. So the various factors that affect children's learning beyond these more sort of easy to measure things of numeracy and literacy. So socio-emotional learning might include things like how much girls and boys feel comfortable in engaging with others in their class and in their communities, the number of friends they have, the support that they have from various networks and so on. So this socio-emotional learning, there are various measures of it. And in Ethiopia, from our measures of looking before and after COVID, we found that it was adversely affected in the context of COVID and that girls were affected more than boys. So this is something that's really important to understand, is the sort of environment in which girls and boys are learning, so not just the outcomes that they're achieving. The next point, and I think Susannah Hares is going to be picking up on this point in particular, so she'll be able to elaborate in a much better than I can, but I think this is absolutely vital to think about the gender-based violence aspects and how this affects girls and boys differently. So it's not to say that boys don't experience gender-based violence, they absolutely do, but the types of violence can be different for girls and boys. Girls are often found to be more at risk of sexual assault, boys are more at risk of corporal punishment, and the fears of gender-based violence can often mean that parents are more likely to pull their girls out of school than their boys. There's some evidence around this, but as I said, I think Susannah will be elaborating further on some of these issues. So following on from that, there's also a lot of evidence to highlight the ways in which and extent to which girls are more likely to get married earlier, especially at times of crisis. And this has again been identified in times of COVID, that girls have been married at an earlier age, and these girls are very unlikely to go back to school. And also that they might experience early pregnancies, which also prevent them from going back to school. Sometimes schools themselves won't allow girls to go back, but even where they in principle do allow them to go back, it's very difficult for various reasons for the girls to re-enter. Within the school environment, there are often gender stereotypes that affect girls' trajectories and how girls see themselves. So we know that in curriculum and textbooks, girls are often portrayed in certain job roles and leadership spaces, and others that aren't seen as relevant for women. So we often see the girls and women in the more traditional roles and not in roles that might be better paid jobs, in more higher level leadership positions and so on. And this reinforces the view for these girls in school as to what the opportunities potentially are for them later on. I've already mentioned the fact that child work affects all children, but is gendered, with girls often particularly affected by domestic work and long hours of work. And the fact that young women are more likely to face discrimination in the labour market, in particular in terms of pay, in terms of the job safety and so on, and the risk an extreme at the risk of sex work and exploitation. So these are all factors that have effects on both girls and boys in some cases, but more likely often to have a more extreme effect on girls, and particularly the most marginalised girls. So a question that often comes up is, and increasingly so, is what about the boys? So the blog that I mentioned earlier that we did together with Antara and colleagues at UNGEI was a reaction to a discussion that was happening and a report that came out that suggested, or we interpreted as suggesting, that we've forgotten about the boys, and some of the funders and donors were saying, oh, we've read this report, we now need to switch our money from focusing on girls to focusing on boys. And we were saying, hang on a minute, yes, boys do need attention, but actually there's still a lot to be done in terms of supporting girls' education for all the reasons I've mentioned. So absolutely, it's the case that marginalised boys can also be denied access to quality education, and this needs attention. But as I've been saying, the systematic disadvantages faced by marginalised girls and then women mean that we still need to use this campaign for girls' education as an entry point. So rather than seeing a focus on girls' education as being something that isn't beneficial to boys, seeing it as an entry point for both actually benefiting girls as well as benefiting boys at the same time, and working together across girls and boys in terms of achieving this change. And and sort of the bottom line being that improving gender equality in education systems will improve multiple aspects of development for all. It's not just the girls who will benefit, both in terms of their schooling as well as beyond. So it's not all bad news, and we've been working just give a couple of examples. We've been working very closely with a non-governmental organisation called CAMFED, the Campaign for Female Education, who have been working for quite a number of years in a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. They've been working particularly in poor rural communities within the countries in which they work, and supporting girls who otherwise would not have been able to get into secondary school in order to get into government secondary schools in those countries. Now, one thing to say about the work, we've done some analysis of the data that CAMFED has that has shown very clearly that the CAMFED programme has had a huge impact on both the retention of these marginalised girls in school, so they have stayed in school when they would normally have been expected to drop out, and when you compare to other very similar schools, these girls have dropped out of those other schools to a greater degree. And these girls have also been learning better than those schools that haven't had the support. But I think importantly also is that there have been found to be spillover effects to boys. So it's not that it's only been girls that have benefited by any means, both because of the design of the interventions and because of more generally the improvement in the school environment overall. It's both boys and girls who have benefited through having a targeted approach on girls' education, as well as improving the quality of education more generally. So one of the aspects of the CAMFED programme is something called learner guides. And I think this is something, it's been quite an innovative programme, and I think other sort of examples of this happening elsewhere increasingly as well, where some of these marginalised girls who otherwise would not have been in school have now become what are called learner guides to support girls who are now just starting their secondary school trajectory, and they provide them support in those schools. So they provide mentorship, they provide life skills training and so on. And these learner guides have some form of support that's also given to them and some training. So again, there's been some evaluation of the learner guide model that has been identified as being very effective. So we're working with CAMFED at the moment to say, OK, you know, this is an NGO programme supporting government schools, but how can we make sure this is both scaled up and within the country, in Tanzania, for example, where it's been working, as well as replicated in other countries. So, for example, in Zimbabwe and Zambia, where CAMFED has also been working on other related projects. So we're working with CAMFED and the governments in these countries to identify what are the features of the programme that the government sees as beneficial, that they see as they could take on in the absence of CAMFED, that they think are going to really make a difference to the quality of education, including for these marginalised girls. So this is, again, a sort of very positive experience of seeing how we can not just that we can actually reach far larger numbers. As a follow-up to this, we're just starting some work with CAMFED that we're also very excited about, to look at not just how this learner guide model is changing the experience of girls within school, but also how it is shifting gender social norms within the communities in which CAMFED has been supporting the school. So how can we make sure that this learner guide model both shifts the balance of power in schools, but also in communities, so that there's a more systemic societal change that hopefully will be a virtuous circle in going forward. So this is what we're about to be starting to look into in order to see what unlocks, complements and grows the girls' capacities as agents of change and helps to elevate their status, and also see how they play different roles within the communities from what they might have previously been playing. So hopefully we can provide further information on that as that work progresses. And finally, other work that we've been doing, part of an independent evaluation team looking at a very large scale programme of work that's been going on for over 10 years now, called the Girls Education Challenge. This is in a number of very low and low middle income countries, including in fragile and conflict states, that has tried to reach the most marginalised girls through a variety of interventions and programmes. And the slide that I've got here is showing a recent report that we have written on teachers and teaching for marginalised girls, which looked at the extent to which these programmes were able to support children, girls in particular, during school closures. And one of the important things that highlighted was the important role of female teachers in supporting the girls during this disruption. So it was the female teachers who would often go to the homes to visit the girls and provide additional support of various kinds. At the same time, we then sort of highlighted that these teachers, and female teachers in particular, had to take on a range of different and new roles in the context of COVID. But obviously that requires them to have support which they needed, that perhaps wasn't as forthcoming as it needs to be more generally. So there are a number of important lessons, and there's a lot of documentation on the Girls Education Challenge website that can give a lot more insights into the various projects and programmes that have been reaching marginalised girls through a wide range of innovations and interventions. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully that has given you an initial flavour, and will hopefully be complementary to the presentations that we're going to shortly be hearing. So thank you very much.
Pauline, thank you. I do have a question before you leave us. How can we measure the development of social and emotional skills? And if changes are made, how can we then measure the progress that we're making?
So that's a really good question, and actually it's something that we've been working on. We had some funding from the Lego Foundation during the school closures due to COVID to look at this, and I know a number of other organisations are also looking at it. So there are some scales that have been developed to quantify socio-emotional skills. Obviously, it needs to be made. Made sure that it's contextually specific and appropriate. So we looked at scales that have been used in different related low-income contexts, and we worked with colleagues within Ethiopia, to sort of identify what questions made sense, which ones didn't make sense, and then piloted them. And so we do have some documentation that identifies those approaches that we used that could be looked at in other contexts as well. So there are definitely some measures that are out there. I think one of the things that we found challenging about doing it as girls become more self-confident, they might become more self-confident in the way they answer some of the questions on these scales. So you might actually see that there's a decline in socio-emotional learning when actually that's because of the way that they're answering. So there's a lot of also thinking about how to make sure we can use these sorts of data in appropriate ways. It's definitely more challenging than measuring basic literacy and numeracy, and that's no doubt why it doesn't get so much attention, or one of the reasons. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And as you can see, it's a work in progress. Thank you, especially for reminding us that all the news is not bad. Yes, there are disparities. Yes, there are gaps that we definitely need to bridge, but there's some really good news out there. Thank you very much again. All right, next up, we have Antara Ganguli, and she is going to share with us a little something about gender transformative education, the pathway to tackling gender stereotypes. Antara, welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for having me here. And as always, it's a pleasure to be in the company of Pauline, Susannah, and others who are going to be speaking today. My name is Antara. I'm the director of the UNGEI Secretariat, and I'm going to be talking about gender stereotypes and how schools and education platforms could be a way to address the harmful gender norms that I believe, but there's a lot of evidence to show this too, underpin so much of the inequality and hardship and poverty that we experience in the world today. But first, let me start with a reflection based on what Pauline was saying on this point around girls' education, gender parity, and gender equality in education. This reminded me of some comments I'd made at Transforming Education Summit earlier this year, and it's very relevant here, so I'm going to share that with you. 106 years ago, there was a letter published in the New York Times which said that letting women vote would mean a degradation of human fiber. I mean, this is literally what the New York Times published. Hence, concluded William T. Sedgwick, the author, it will probably never come. For mankind will not lightly abandon at the call of a few fanatics, fanatics here being, of course, those who believe that women should vote, the hard-earned achievements of the ages. Now, this letter was written by a teacher, a very highly regarded professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he was not alone in his views at MIT, where even in 1950, a move to admit women students as undergraduates was rejected. 1950, they would not have women students as undergraduates. Arguments were made that it was a waste of public expenditure because to educate women in science and spend that amount of money on them would never pay off because they would never work. But also that so much studying of science would be bad for women's bodies and minds. I am bringing this up because I want to remind us that girls' education, the way it is situated today, is not the way it was always situated. And that in fact, the fight for gender equality, the fight for women to vote, came from the same place that the fight for girls' education came from. And if the history of girls' education is deeply political, so is its present. And the conversation we are having today very much illustrates that. But let me give you another example. Not just in Afghanistan, where, by the way, we have completely failed girls, but I mean, all of you can think about the number of speeches and concept notes and annual reports you have seen where girls' education is still talked about by pointing out the benefit that the educated girl will have on other people, especially her unborn children. So we put the picture of a smiling 6-year-old child in pigtails and we say, yes, let's educate her because one day this child will become a mother. So it may be 106 years later from that New York Times article, but apparently we still need reasons to invest in girls that have nothing to do with the girls themselves. So this is why I want to make the case that we need to put more effort and investment into exploring not just how we can achieve SDG 4, but how can we use education platforms and education actors and education infrastructure to achieve SDG 5. All children, we agree, should be able to dream about their future without limits or restrictions. Yet there is a universal force in the world that constricts children's aspirations and really impacts violent behavior, and that's gender stereotypes. A stereotype is a widely held belief about the character and behavior of all members of a group. So when we say X racial group dances really well, that's actually a stereotype. When we say X ethnic community is very lazy, that's a stereotype. When we say women like to be nurturing and men are great at being assertive, those are all stereotypes. There is a lot of evidence to show that gender stereotypes really negatively impact children, from their making decisions on careers all the way into harmful relationships, which can be violent. So for example, boys feel pressure to go into high earning sectors because they learn early that the only expectation of men is to provide economic support for their households. Meanwhile, girls gravitate to careers in the care economy because women are associated with caregiving. That's what they see. So these norms get entrenched and normalized, and they become, in many cases, dangerous and violent. Yet, what we have never really explored is what if we begin to address this gender socialization that children go through from birth so that these children question these stereotypes, that these children begin to see what gender equality experts have been saying for hundreds of years now, that gender is a social construct. It is not biology. I'll give you an example. We've known for more than 2 decades now that a boy who grows up in a household where he witnesses domestic violence or intimate partner violence, not even experiences it, just witnesses it, is 8 times more likely to grow up to be a perpetrator himself. And a girl who grows up in a household where she witnesses this is twice as likely to enter into a relationship when she is older, where she will be the target of gender-based violence. So we have known this information for two and a half decades. What have we done for these children? Where have we created opportunities for these children to deal with the trauma that they're going through in their homes and learn to reject the harmful norms and behaviors they have seen there and aspire to be a different kind of adult when they grow up? So this year, UNGEI launched the first multi-country program to end gender stereotypes through classroom. And in this program, what we're trying to do in 3 countries, India, Bangladesh, and Niger, is through play-based, activity-based, reflection-based curricula, help children question what they see around them. So we don't want to tell them this is wrong and this is right. We want them to ask questions. Let me share some examples of what that looks like. So this was in a program that was done in India, in one of the most patriarchal states in India, in Haryana, and it was actually a program that I had been involved in when I was with UNICEF India. We worked with 10 to 12-year-olds only through games. So we would play snakes and ladders. We would, come up with different games that we would play together to help them ask questions. One of those games was we asked them to keep a diary for, I see something in the chat. Am I speaking too long? We asked them to keep a diary of how much time their mothers and fathers or male and female caregivers at home spend on different things. So that included leisure, sleep, watching TV, hanging out at the corner tea stall or coffee shop with their friends. That included work, paid work, unpaid work. That included cooking, that included cleaning, that included bathing the children, that included helping children do homework. At the end of those 2 weeks, these 10 and 11-year-old boys and girls, I mean, it was the co-ed schools, the girls came back not surprised. Yes, our mothers spend a lot more time doing XYZ than our fathers. The boys came back furious. They were like, I don't get this. Why is it that my father sleeps 8 hours a day? My mom seems to only sleep 5 hours a day because I heard her in the morning at 6 a.m. And yet through the day, she's still doing a lot more work than my dad. And she's still the one serving him the dinner and taking away the dinner plate, taking it to the kitchen and so on and so forth. So these boys had seen something that was invisible, that has been invisible to all of us growing up, which is the unpaid care work that women and girls do. What's really valuable about this is you can't unsee it. Once you see that, you're always going to see that and you're always going to ask questions. So what UNGEI is hoping to do through this multi-country program is to really bring together an already strong community of actors to establish the evidence and really advocate for education decision makers to not just say, yes, children are going to go through our schools and learn to read, learn to write, learn about geography, learn about climate change, learn how to interact with each other. They're going to leave our schools with an understanding of human rights and a belief in human rights. Because at the end of the day, what is the point of having a graduate of a school who can, I don't know, maybe win the Nobel Prize for, developing a new tool or, make $1 billion on technology if they're not a good person who values the human rights of other people and is able to coexist with them peacefully and with respect. So that is where we believe we need a new movement. We need we need a renewed and more specific focus on children learning to ask questions about themselves, about their roles in society based on gender, which will always be intersectional. And so that means race and ethnicity and so on. And by the way, just one last point and then I'll stop. This may be one of the best ways to create a world in the future that is also accepting of diversity and gender identity. Because what the evidence shows is that boy-on-boy violence and bullying in school is almost always related to some sort of insult and violence related to homosexuality. And so if we are able to begin to tease apart and ask questions and make less sacred the values of masculinity with power and with heterosexuality, that is actually a huge gift, not just for girls, but absolutely for boys as well. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to hearing thoughts and questions, and very much looking forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Antara. I really appreciated you reminding us that this is very new. You know, when you think of MIT, oh yeah, MIT, and you think, wow, only in the 1950s that science was bad for girls' bodies and minds. I'm blown away. So thank you for reminding us that actually all of the movements that surround identity, whether gender or race or culture, all of those movements are very new. From what you said, what little thing can all of us do that would help? You know, we can't necessarily go to school and say, hey, boys, we're going to do this. We may not be in the positions of power to create a larger scale movement, but how can we do something? What small bite strategy can we use in our day-to-day lives that will move the movement forward, that will, help us be better at understanding that gender roles are social constructs and begin to move the needle in changing our ideas of what gender means?
Thank you for that. Well, first of all, I think most empowered women, and it certainly seems like you are one as well, we've been fighting harmful gender norms our lives to be where we are. And many men have too, and certainly LGBTQI colleagues. So to the extent that we can not be a passive bystander. So when somebody says something harmful around gender norms, to be the person to speak up and say, well, you know, I don't think it's funny that you made that joke, because actually women suffer a lot because of you know, the way they are objectified and sexualized. So please don't do that. I think men, if you're able to speak back to men friends and colleagues and say, I don't find that dad joke funny. You know, and why are you saying that I'm babysitting my own child? I'm parenting my own child. So, you know, those kinds of things, you know, to the extent that we don't bystand the ongoing harmful rhetoric around gender norms, that's fantastic. And to the extent that for the children in our lives, whether they are your friends' kids, your nieces, your nephews, don't subscribe to the trucks for boys and girls for dolls schema. You know, no blue for boys and pink for girls. Everybody can wear all colors. The more of us that there are who do that, inshallah, one day you walk into a Walmart or you shop online at the Gap, there isn't going to be clothes for toddler boys and clothes for toddler girls, because guess what? Those bodies don't need different clothes based on their biological sex.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that makes us all have to reflect, you know, the gender reveal parties and those things. And it's not that you can't enjoy those things for you, but also be very aware of what that does on in the larger scale of things. So thank you again, Antara. We really do appreciate it. Interesting. It says that my camera is not working. I'm going to cut it off and cut it back on. Hopefully you can still hear my voice. You don't need to see me anyway. As a matter of fact, Susannah Hares is up next, and she's going to talk with us about tackling violence as a barrier to education. All right, Susannah, are you there?
I am there. I'm just, so let me do that.
And while she's getting ready, we've heard already that violence is something that girls face disproportionately, particularly sexual violence, and that sometimes parents pull their students out of school because of those fears. So she's going to give us an idea about what we can do about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all see my slides now.
Yes.
So I want to pick up on this theme that's come through in both of the first presentations from Pauline and Antara, and to go into a bit more detail on the issue of violence in schools. I think far too often schools and school systems really fail at the core tasks of keeping children safe from harm in school. I don't think any of us here would let our children go to school that subjected them to abuse. But it seems to me that sort of international organisations have been quite slow to get behind addressing this issue that's really core to education. For example, if you read the World Bank's 2018 World Development Report, a great report, and one of my dear colleagues was sort of core to the writing of it, you barely see a mention of violence against kids in that report. And I want to sort of make the case today that violence in schools against girls and also against boys deserves the same technocratic seriousness as that's dedicated to improving enrolment and improving test scores. So I'm going to go through, first of all, a bit of the data on what we know about school violence. Then I'll talk about why I think it's not yet a priority for the global education sector. And then try to, I guess, be a bit more action orientated than usual in these presentations on school violence. There are things that we can do, and I think we should be doing more of it. So first of all, school violence is pervasive. This is two sets of data, DHS and PISA data. PISA for development is a set of education assessments focused on developing countries. And as part of the survey, it asks 15-year-olds if they've experienced unwanted or inappropriate touching by their teachers. The country coverage is quite limited at the moment, but the results from the two African countries that participated are pretty startling for both boys and girls, actually. 1 in 8 boys and girls in Senegal and in Zambia report having been sexually harassed by a teacher in the last 4 weeks, not ever, but the last 4 weeks. I guess I wanted just at this point to pick up on Pauline's really good points about the differential impact of violence against girls and boys. And, you know, it certainly isn't either or. I think we can see from some of this data that both are exposed. I'm going to talk a bit later about why the data is not good enough. And one reason for that is that, you know, violence against boys and girls is probably quite different perpetrators, different locations, different types of violence. And if we're going to understand how to tackle it, we really have to understand that differential experience, exposure, and impact on boys and girls. So let's move on. The chart on the left-hand side, this is DHS data, demographic and health survey data, which is quite an important source of teacher-perpetrated sexual violence. In these surveys, adult women are asked, has anyone ever forced you in any way to have sexual intercourse when you did not want to? And they also ask who the perpetrator was the first time the woman was forced. And the most common perpetrators are a current or former husband or partner, but for a small percentage of women, it was a teacher. And even though it's a small percentage, that translates into millions of women, over 10 million women in India, 6 million in the DRC, and 3 million in Nigeria who've all experienced rape by a teacher. Just simply unacceptable. A different type of violence in schools, corporal punishment. It's still lawful in more than 60 countries. That in those countries live half of the world's school-age children. And it continues in countries even where it's legally banned, often, unfortunately, with the support of parents. A study of 8-year-olds in 4 countries found that the majority of those children had witnessed a teacher using corporal punishment in the last week. It's not just a developing country issue. Teacher corporal punishment in the United States, it's in decline, but it's still legal. And in 3 states, it's used in more than half of schools. So always pretty shocking to me to learn that the US hasn't completely banned that yet. Emotional violence from teachers, verbal abuse and humiliation is also pretty common in schools. And at times, children can find that more upsetting than physical punishment. So violent discipline continues to be an everyday reality for many children around the world, and it's a clear violation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So then why I'm saying it's not yet a priority in the global education sector. I think, you know, I can argue this as the global education world is sort of doubling down on good and needed efforts to address the global learning crisis. it's not clear that there are sufficient efforts going into keeping girls safe at school. There are lots of good people working on ways to eliminate violence against girls in school, including people at this meeting today. And often this data isn't going to surprise them. But I think many people, including those who work every day in the global education sector, just don't realise the scope of the problem. And I think that's why we're trying to keep sounding the alarms. Some of these publications up on the screen now, World Bank, GPE publications, really sort of no focus on school violence at all. It's surprising to me that there's no target in the SDGs specifically focused on eliminating violence in school. And of course, there are many competing priorities in education, and policymakers globally and domestically are regularly forced to make trade-offs. But I think everything else is pretty much secondary to making sure that children are safe from harm while they're at school. However, since we're trying to also sort of provide good news at this meeting too, some donors do take school violence seriously. So education policies from the UK FCDO, USAID, both published sort of more recently, do sort of have a strong focus on violence in schools, but others like these ones on the screen barely touch on the topic. I think another reason it doesn't get much attention is it's kind of seen as okay by a lot of core stakeholders in the education system. So this is data from a CGD survey of education policymakers and MPs, and we surveyed about 600 and asked them sort of their views and perceptions on various education related topics, including corporal punishment. And sort of huge heterogeneity across different countries, but you can see in quite a few countries among policymakers, there's strong support for the ability of teachers to beat children. So the question was to MPs and to policymakers and education ministries, do you think that teachers and parents are ever justified in beating children? And quite a lot think that it is sometimes or always justified. And then many of you may know about the Transforming Education Summit that took place late September, a couple of months ago in New York. As part of that summit, about 100 countries submitted statements of commitments ahead of the meeting, which sort of outlined their priorities and commitments for their education systems. And again, we saw that school safety sort of ranked quite low in terms of priorities compared with other education issues. I think teaching and learning rightly at the top there, teachers rightly at the top, but it's not clear to me that sort of technology and so on is an issue of more importance than keeping children safe in schools. So what more can we do to eliminate violence in schools? I think three things that we at CGD and many of our partners really want to do is to get better data on school violence, to generate better evidence on what works to eliminate violence, and to get the education sector to care more. So on sort of the data challenge specifically, one sort of real problem is a difficulty in obtaining reliable and up-to-date data about the scale and nature of the school violence crisis. So what I mean here is that terms like sexual harassment and sexual abuse are used quite interchangeably and not always consistently, and definitions of abuse can range from bullying and verbal abuse all the way through to teacher-perpetrated rape of students. Let's be clear, all are bad, but they're different, and often different perpetrators, different victims, different locations. It's not clear from the data where children are most at risk. School-related violence can cover children in school, around school, or on their way to school. And clearly some of the gender issues around where girls are most at risk really come through there. And so I think we need to know much more about the problem. And then secondly, we need to generate better evidence on what actually works to eliminate violence in schools. So we simply don't have enough well-evidenced interventions. Not to say that there are none. There are some superb organisations working day in, day out to try to tackle this problem, Raising Voices, Breakthrough India, and many others. And I think it's important now that we identify more promising interventions and generate that evidence through rigorous evaluations and provide policymakers and donors with options if they want to invest in reducing violence. And then we need to get the education sector to care a bit more. I think it should be the case that no school system can be deemed good if its schools aren't safe. No school should be deemed good if it's not safe for children. And I'm delighted that we're talking about it here at this education conference. I don't think it should be possible to go to an education conference where preventing violence against children is not sort of core to that conference agenda. So a lot to do, and a huge amount to do to try to differentiate the impacts and the solutions for boys and girls. But I think there's momentum now to tackle this issue, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you to try to advance this agenda.
Susannah, thank you so much. There's one question I would really like to ask. When you say get better data on school violence, again, half the world's children are subject to corporal punishment. How do we get really accurate data that does not support those practices, but that's really neutral? If you're at a country or in a state where that's acceptable, how do we normalize at least making it fair until we can grow out of it? I'll just go with that.
Yeah, you ask really good and really difficult questions. That's one of the core challenges, you know, even in the UK where I am, where corporal punishment's been banned for about 20 years now, about 50% of parents still think it should be brought back. So, you know, we do see that support for corporal punishment drops off in the years following a ban, but often parents think it's the right way to discipline children and to make schools orderly and academic. And sort of collecting data in those contexts can be really challenging. So we have so many challenges around collecting data on school violence. It's difficult to ask children about their exposure to violence if we then can't do very much about it. So that you ask a child to report that their teacher has beaten them or abused them or worse, and then you can't offer some support to that child when they're sort of suffering post-trauma. That's a very difficult thing to do ethically. And then we also have issues about disclosure. So sometimes children, teachers will be nervous about disclosing violence that they've been exposed to because culturally it may be normalized that women are exposed to violence, or they may be scared about their job or retaliation from their teachers. There was a fascinating paper released yesterday by a team at Raising Voices and London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who've been working together for about 10 years now on reducing violence in schools in Uganda. And some of the interviews that they shared in that paper that they had done with children and teachers about the reasons why they weren't able to disclose or report the violence was just, it was really enlightening, and it kind of showed someone like me who works mostly with quantitative data why those sort of qualitative interviews and really kind of understanding the nuance of school violence experiences is so important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I can simply say, if you are an educator in those spaces, be aware that, again, students are not necessarily going to be able to report or even have the language to report an abuse of this power. So then be aware of asking the right kinds of questions. There's some great resources out there. Ask the right kinds of questions, and most of all, be that trusted adult in the space. That's the best thing that you can do, that we all can do. All right, thank you again. I appreciate so much your quantitative data and for sharing just kind of how we can tackle those issues from, you know, across the globe. Thank you again. All right, next up we have Alexa Joyce, who is going to talk to us about preparing students to be future ready. Alexa?
I am super excited to be here with you today.
Welcome.
And let me just fire up the presentation so I can dig right in. So I'm joining you from Brussels in Belgium, and I'm really excited to be sharing some of our perspectives at Microsoft around preparing students to be future ready and how we can do that in an inclusive way and give opportunities to girls, but also to all kinds of students who might not typically see themselves as being tech specialists or being computer scientists. So I want to kick off by just digging into why is it so important that we actually think about developing students' technical skills and future ready technical skills? Well, we're in the midst of this fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure that many of you, after you finish your working day, sit down and watch a movie on Netflix with your kids or watch a TV series. And so many parts of our lives like that have switched to being driven by tools like AI, by tools like the cloud, whether it's for fun or whether it's for our working lives. And all of this disruption, which is going from a technology standpoint out in society, is also disrupting the kinds of skills that we need to develop as students go through the education system, and how we can make those skills more inclusive and more accessible for every single student, whether it's girls or whether it's other excluded groups as well. So at Microsoft, we take this responsibility incredibly seriously. We are dedicated to making sure that as many people as possible from diverse backgrounds get the opportunities to succeed in the digital economy by developing their skill sets, but also developing their knowledge and their opportunities to succeed in the digital economy. So why is this so important for us at Microsoft? Well, obviously, from one perspective, we really care that people, when you buy our tools or use our tools at school or at work, that you're able to do that in a way that actually brings value to you. But also what we know from the tech industry and from research on successful design of technical tools is that those tools which are built and envisioned by diverse groups of people, whether it's by bringing more women into the industry or other people with different types of needs, actually creates much better experiences, better products, better tools, which are able to also serve the needs of a more diverse population as well. So let me just make sure my screen is going to advance in the right direction. My apologies. So right now, if you look across the world, there's a huge challenge for us to actually build inclusive technology, because we have too few computer science graduates, particularly in the Western world. So if you look in Europe, if you look in the US, UK, Australia, you'll typically see that the computer science field is kind of the poor cousin in the space of science and technology, which is already a relatively minor pursuit compared to many other subject areas. And we're actually seeing a downward trend in the number of computer science bachelor degrees being taken in the developed world, and particularly in Europe. And at the same time, we see that even out of those students that do go into computer science bachelor degrees, we have a serious diversity issue. So if you look at the data here on the left, which comes from the European Commission, actually only 17% of ICT or computer science students are female, and only 16.7% of them go on to actually be employed in the IT industry. And we see similar challenges in other parts of the world as well. And this is also reflected by the background of the students who join computer science bachelor courses as well. We have a very heavy preponderance of Caucasian white background and much smaller percentages of other backgrounds. So we have a challenge that we need to address through the school system, through universities, through careers advice, to rethink how we portray computer science to students who might not see themselves as a traditional computer scientist. And we also need to expose students in schools and in universities to many more role models. I've done research myself in a past job before I landed at Microsoft on some of the reasons why girls were choosing technical subjects in school or choosing technical subjects in university. And it was nothing to do with achievement. In fact, they were achieving really well, if not better than their male peers, but they lacked confidence in the space, and they were more likely to get negative reinforcement from family and from role models within their schools, or even from textbooks and the wider culture than boys. And so we need to work harder at making sure that we address those stereotypes, whether it's for girls or whether it's for other non-traditional backgrounds that we want to encourage to think about computer science. And it's not just about pure computer science as well. I have to say that what we see today is that people who are really successful in the world of technology are not necessarily computer scientists themselves. I'm not a computer scientist. My special area of study is actually biological science, sustainability, and education, but using technology as a way to achieve the goals in biology, to achieve the goals of education, or to achieve the goals of sustainability. And being able to combine different subject areas and inject technology as a tool into whether it's business, whether it's health, whether it's any other area of work is tremendously powerful. And we see it also as an incredible opportunity for us to accelerate socioeconomic inclusion of people from non-traditional backgrounds as well, because those students who go into technical roles or go into the tech industry are typically paid better than in other industries. So it can be really a motor to generate community development by bringing in non-traditional backgrounds as well. We also hear that we need to think about creating new types of partnerships. So we've got this global economic crisis going on where even though we've got a tightening of job markets and an economic slowdown taking place, there is still this ongoing demand for technical skilling. The economy's really changed because of COVID. We've got declining confidence among students in the value of higher education. And we see a need for new types of learning and new types of partnerships between technology providers and the education system. And we see that there's also very different situations when you look across the globe. Some countries have a computer science curriculum from primary through to secondary school that then tees up for students to succeed at tertiary level. Some countries have no computer science curriculum at all. And then some have shallow or patchy curriculum, or they might introduce a little bit of coding for a code week or something like that, but don't have a consistent approach to it. And so we recognize at Microsoft that for education systems to address this, it's extremely challenging. And even in those that have a really well-developed curriculum, they're not necessarily always finding it easy to get that implemented in schools. There's a really complex set of interactions that an education system needs to address to actually make computer science curriculum successful in schools. And this is a framework developed by the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, which I think really summarises the problem. You need great and enlightened ways of integrating computational thinking across the curriculum at all levels of education. You need a systemic rollout with appropriate assessment and adequate support for teachers, which is one of the hardest things that many systems find to do, because computer science is still a new subject for most teachers out in schools today. There needs to be a really effective support policy that brings in different stakeholders like tech companies, but also non-profits who are doing amazing work in this space, as well as consolidated understanding and vision of why we're actually making this change, whether it's the head teacher of a school, whether it's parents, so that we can all head in the same direction of getting computer science more embedded in what we do in schooling. So at Microsoft, we really want to support schools and universities in preparing students for these jobs of tomorrow. We recognise that many students who've been through traditional computer science education, and particularly girls and excluded groups as well, find it frustrating, find it boring, find it dry. And we've seen that getting more hands-on opportunities to problem solving using technology is something which really makes a difference for them. And at the same time, when we get that hands-on exposure to tools that they might actually use in the workplace, it means that they're much more recruitable when they go into looking for their first job when they graduate. But that's really hard for educators to stay on top of, because we in the tech industry keep changing the tools, we keep inventing new things and bringing them out. So it's very hard to create curriculum which stay on top of all these changes. And so we want to work closely with institutions to actually bring curriculum that we update and that we advance alongside what's provided by the institution, to make it easier to adapt to that ongoing change, and to partner with institutions excuse me, so that we can also help connect colleges and universities with the companies that we work with at Microsoft to help build a pathway for students with technical skills to actually go into jobs where they can use those skills. So to do this, we've built a program called Microsoft Learn for Educators, where we give the opportunity to bring a technical skilling pathways into schools. We give training and support to educators to do curriculum integration, to plan out how the curriculum can be adapted, and to train them up to be able to actually get hands-on with that curriculum themselves. We provide an opportunity for students to actually certify on that curriculum as part of their learning process, so that they can graduate from college or from university or even school in some countries with a Microsoft certification, as well as the graduation certificate from wherever they're studying, and get those students really ready for future jobs. Oops. So why do we encourage the adoption of student certification alongside technical curriculum? Well, first of all, we've done a lot of research on what the impact is of student certification. And first is that students who have certification, when they go onto the job market, they actually get recognized for that certification and typically more likely to be hired than those students that don't have it. We've also seen through our research that the students who've had exposure to industry tools are actually more likely to be successful when they go into their first jobs, more likely to get promotions, and more likely to be able to be immediately successful on projects because they've been hands-on with tools that they might encounter when they're in their first job. And we see that hiring managers are actively looking for people with these types of certifications. So our program's available in 85 countries in 12 languages. We've supported more than 1,000 institutions and growing our community of educators every day. And we've certified more than 125,000 students. We're seeing that those students are able to get into those in-demand job roles, as I mentioned, but also increase their salary potential. And our entry-level qualifications in areas like cybersecurity, like AI, like data science are incredibly popular with institutions and with students themselves. We're seeing that they get that competitive edge from adopting these certifications as part of their learning pathway. So who's actually adopting this types of curriculum, and who are we working with? So let me give you an example. Nottingham University in the UK has got an integrated strategy to bring students up to date in terms of digital skilling in a number of different curriculum areas. So you can study Microsoft AI, cloud computing, or data analytics certification as part of your bachelor's degree or as part of a master's degree. And so they joined our program to get their faculty skilled up and get them able to actually offer these certifications as part of their degree course. And I met one of the students graduating from one of these courses, and his first job is in the area of business intelligence and analytics. And he really credited having done the certification as giving him the idea that he could work in that space, and also giving him the confidence to go out and get that job. We're also working closely with vocational institutions. And so this is an example from Asia. The Hong Kong Institute of Vocational Education is one of the first schools in Hong Kong to adopt our curriculum. And there they focus very tightly on cloud and on Azure skills, and built hackathons alongside the learning experiences so that students could get really hands-on with their tools. And they found that this is really successful and helpful for them as well in getting their students into jobs, particularly at this point where they're the only school in Hong Kong actually offering this certification. So their students were really sought after they got involved in the program. So what are the next steps? Well, one of the first things, if you're in an institution or in a school or in a college, we are actually offering certifications and self-learning pathways for any student entirely for free for this academic year. So they could take cybersecurity, data, AI, or any of the above, or all of the above if they wish, entirely for free by taking the self-paced online learning courses available on Microsoft Learn. That then, once they've completed their learning process, they get a free practice test, so they can take a practice exam before actually taking the certification exam itself. and then they get the voucher to take the full-scale exam itself. And we're seeing really amazing level of excitement and engagement with students wanting to take this certification. And so I would encourage you, if you have students excited about or interested in the computer science or IT space, to go and try out that learning pathway. It's mainly focused, I would say, for students aged 16 and up, but we are seeing some countries using this with students as young as 12 years old. So it's really, really exciting to see such young students really getting to grips with professional level AI tools as part of their learning process. I would also add that every single student gets access to $100 of Microsoft Cloud credit so that they can experiment using the Microsoft Cloud, whether it's for hackathon projects or for their own personal learning as part of our programs. So if you want to get involved with us and go on this journey of integrating cutting edge IT topics into your classrooms, you can work with us to register into our Microsoft Learn for Educators program. We'll help to work with you to identify a program advisor who will represent the institution, can help work with the teachers around the institution to get trained up on the content and give you advice on how to integrate content into the curriculum, to activate all the student benefits, which includes hands-on lab environments, the cloud credits, the opportunity to take the free exams. And then we have an educator community with educators from around the world who support each other, give each other advice, and we run regular office hours to help ensure that we help solve any challenges that educators might be having in implementing this curriculum in their institutions. And you can sign up whether at institution level or as an individual faculty or teacher to get your hands on all of the content, the training guides, the presentations, and all of the materials that you need to really get started and to teach this to your community of learners. So I'm going to stop there. I want to thank you for the time that you spent today hearing about what we do at Microsoft to make it easier to access IT and technical knowledge, and look forward to some of you joining our program.
Thank you so much, Alexa. Susannah is going to come back, and Pauline as well. Antara has had to leave, unfortunately. But before we all gather, I'd like to know from you, the Microsoft programs, are they also, a lot of users are Chromebook users. Are these certifications and these courses also Chrome friendly?
That's a great question. So they run on the web. So you should be able to use the vast majority of the tools on Chrome. I would say to get access to the kind of more upper level courses, which go beyond the fundamentals, there you would really need a device where you can install developer tools to play around with them. But that's really for the 18-year-old plus age group.
Okay, and so even for students who might only be able to access a phone, is this something that they can work on as well?
So there is a phone interface for all of the learning pathways, so that is possible. And the only thing I don't know, I'm not 100% sure if the certification exam would be possible on a phone. You may need to take the exam itself on a PC, but doing all of the learning and preparing for the exam is perfectly possible with a phone.
That's wonderful, because that includes so many people, and that's what we're talking about today, is how we can include girls better in all situations and according to all kinds of challenges or hindrances that they might be experiencing. Alexa, how can we find you online? How can we interact with you if we have questions?
So you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Alexa Joyce, and happy to talk with you there, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm also super active there, so feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect with you and your community.
All right, very good. Thank you. At Alexa Joyce on Twitter and on LinkedIn if you have further questions. Susannah, how about you? How can we connect with you out in the Twitterverse?
I am on Susannah Hares on Twitter. I possibly have more pictures of my toddler than about education, but you will find some education content there as well. I don't really use LinkedIn, so just Twitter for me.
Okay, very good. So you tell us that again. It's at?
Just Susannah Hares.
Okay, at Susannah Hares. See, that's so nice. Everything is just really simple. Like Alexa Joyce, Susannah Hares, and Pauline, how about you?
Yeah, so Susannah has some very cute pictures of her toddler, but also some serious stuff as well. So we've actually been tweeting in the meantime. So I'm at Pauline with M Rose. So I couldn't be so straightforward because there was already another Pauline Rose. So I had to put an M in the middle.
Easy to.
I'm on LinkedIn, but I can't remember what I am. I'm sure people can search and find.
That's good. Pauline M. Rose, and Antara, in case you'd like to connect with her, is Antara Ganguli. Again, everybody's really straightforward today. Antara Ganguli on Twitter. Do you ladies have any big takeaways for us? Like, I had so much fun. Oh my God, I got so much information. My mind is exploding. What can I go out and do right now? I just need not actually a small, big takeaway. What's my small bite with big impact? I will start with you, Pauline.
Wow, that's putting me on the spot. I think sort of just the thread across Susannah and Tara and my presentations were really about tackling what Susannah was focusing on, the sort of gender-based violence, and as I was talking about, in a sort of perhaps the sort of positive side of that, tackling the gender social norms and really making sure we're changing the dynamics within local communities and within schools themselves to ensure that girls both aren't affected and aren't having these negative experiences through their schooling, but also within communities, but also more positively that they are able to make their own decisions about their futures, have opportunities about their working lives and other aspects of their lives that they can make decisions about, which are much more constructive and productive than is often the case. And I think that goes back to the example that I was saying of the work that we're doing with CAMFED. I should say, I know we're working with colleagues in Pakistan as well, where there's some similar work going on with an organisation that Susannah knows well as well, the Citizen Foundation. So there's sort of real momentum around this. And I feel we've got to use this momentum and say, you know, actually use our collective energy and efforts to see change.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Pauline. Susannah, you next. What's our small bite that we can go out right now and tackle?
So I think there's a lot of interest in girls' education. You know, you get people like Boris Johnson, thankfully no longer our Prime Minister, but he once was, celebrities, politicians, talking about girls' education as kind of the magic bullet. And it's great that there's support from important, influential people. I think what it can do is to reduce the problem and to take out some of the nuance and complexity that there is in girls' education and the challenges of, you know, tackling these issues that are so deeply embedded in cultures and communities. And I must admit that it can be tempting to be a reductionist with the data as well, because we like to have, you know, big headline figures that often show good news. Hey, more girls are in school, girls are learning as much as boys. And I think one of the things that really came through from the presentations today was that, you know, it's not always, that data is not one-dimensional, and we have to be really careful about sort of drawing strong conclusions about progress from single data points and do our best to understand the complexity of the problem. And so I'm not being very on task. What we can go away now and do, I think, is to make a real effort to work with data on girls' education, to make sure we have more of it, better quality data, quantitative and qualitative data, and to use it and communicate it in the nuanced way that it deserves.
And if you came in late, what she talked about was sometimes the way questions are phrased, sometimes the way our students answer questions may not give us the real data. So be the adult in the room that is walking around looking for the context for those numbers. Thank you so much. Alexa is also here, so pop back on. Oh no, I know Alexa's here. She's here. I thought you meant Antara. All right, Alexa, you want to go ahead and tell us what can we do like now? What's our small bite with big impact?
Yeah, no, I had to nip away to close the door because my sons were making a lot of noise in the background. So the perils of working from home. Yeah, so I think what I'd like to leave as a kind of takeaway is that we need to ensure that girls and women are more included in science and technology development, that unless we do that, we're going to continue to kind of perpetuate cycles where technology is not appropriate for inclusion. And also, I think one of the things which is really interesting is that when we bring more women into the tech space, women tend to also bring other neglected groups into the tech space with them. So it's incredibly powerful to make that happen. And we need to think more inclusively about how do we bring that technical skilling and computer science skilling into the hands of every single student, and to open up the minds of.
Oh, she froze. I will say on her behalf, in case she doesn't unfreeze, aka.ms/student certification, and that's where you can go and get free certifications for all you girls and all you boys, or maybe even for yourselves. You froze, and so what I did was I gave the website out where people can go and get more information. All right, it's almost break time. I have been your moderator. My name is Hedrick Nichols, author, educator, host of Small Bites, and you can connect with me at Hedrick. There we go. At Hedrick. Actually on every major platform. And if you want to watch education and dancing, you can even connect with me on TikTok. So with that said, we're going to actually make it a whole 7-minute break and come back right at 1:30. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. There are about 400 people at last count online just to find out how we can better bridge the gap for girls' inclusivity in education. And that says that we are all here, we're all invested, and there's so many big takeaways. Thank you so much again, Alexa. Thank you, Antara. Thank you, Pauline, and thank you, Susannah. I appreciate your time and your investing in this project. Thank you, Sophia, and of course, we'll have some more thank yous later for our sponsors. All right, see you in just about 7 minutes.
Welcome to Odyssey. Welcome to Odyssey Academy, a place that nurtures vulnerable groups such as refugees, migrants, and unemployed Greeks to develop their skills and integrate in the world of work.
Odyssey Academy offers quality training solutions resulting in highly qualified graduates that satisfy completely the needs of the job market.
Our vision is to build a world where all young people thrive and realize their full potential.
Our state-of-the-art facility includes 12 fully equipped training spaces that simulate real-life working environments, thus enabling a hands-on, project-based educational approach. The courses we plan are derived from current requests of the hiring companies and expand over a number of fields, including HoReCa, construction, tech and business.
Έμαθα από τη μητέρα μου για την Οδύσσια που έκανε κάποια μαθήματα και αποφάσισα να παρακολουθήσω κι εγώ κάποια μαθήματα.
In 2021 alone, Odyssey Academy accommodated 1,200 vulnerable people, which is a third of the total 4,500 requests for training that we received. Gazing at the future, we plan to serve 5 times more people, reaching over 6,300 by 2024.
From nothing to something, if you from the darkness, you come to the light.
My name is Hannah. My nationality is from Afghanistan. I have been in Athens for 2 years. I learned about Odyssey from my friends. When I was in Iran, I had experience about sales and business. And when I arrived in Athens, I didn't want to lose my experience and about my skills. And I searched a lot about that skills and I find it Odyssey. Course sales and soft skills helped me to communicate with customers better than before. My course was very great and my professor was good. He taught me very well and I learned good. After the course, I had more confidence in my interview and about the finding good position and good job. I work as a community liaison officer at the UTIMA organization and I'm vice president in Afghan community and I am social activist from 2020 since now. It is difficult to find a job, especially if you are a woman, because the majority doesn't have any professional skills. So it is hard for them to enter the job market without the skills. Moreover, their communication difficult because they don't know the language. So even if they can speak basic to intermediate language, they require some help and directions to find about the rise in the job market. Thank you, Odisa and Kahano Foundation about this opportunity to improve my skills and find it a job.
Hello, everybody. Are we ready to start?
Yeah. Hi, Maggie.
Hello, I just turned my mic off. So nice to join everybody.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Natasha, let us know when we're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just mute myself again so I don't interrupt.
All right, guys, thank you very much for waiting. We're ready to go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Girls Inclusivity in Education Roundtable. I'm delighted to be here. My name's Leonora Dowley, and I have spent a lot of my career working in girls' education. But it's not about me today. I've been invited to chair this incredible roundtable. As a bit of an introduction, as we know, as we've just heard, in many areas around the world, of course, girls do not have equal access to education, and they are deprivileged in comparison with boys. We've heard that multiple factors contribute to this, including early marriage, stereotypes for women's future roles, division of household labour, safety at school and on the way to and from it, and stigma around menstruation, among other things. So girls receive an education, but aside from this, girls who receive an education are less likely to marry young and more likely to lead healthy and productive lives. They're likely to earn higher incomes, participate in the decisions that most affect them, and also build better futures for themselves and their families. And girls' education strengthens economies and reduces inequality, contributes to more stable, resilient societies that gives all individuals, including boys and men, the opportunity to fulfill their potential. However, more importantly than this, education is a right. Full stop. So we're going to talk about this today, and I'm really pleased to be joined by 4 people who have first-hand experience of parts of this problem and have also engaged in various initiatives to help girls' inclusivity. 2 of them are Global Student Prize finalists and 2 are Global Teacher Prize winners. So thank you very much for joining us. We have Lamia Butt from the UAE, who has worked with the government of Pakistan to propose legislation and procedures to ensure minority girls get access to education. We've got Ranjit Singh Desale from India, who has managed to improve girls' attendance at school in his region from 2% to 100% through his initiatives, also impacting teenage marriage rates. We've got Oluwandamilola Akintewe from Nigeria, who has years of creating and implementing social impact projects in rural communities and started an initiative called Rebirth, which provides economic empowerment to parents. And we have Maggie McDonald from Canada, who has worked with Inuit youth for the last decade and has first-hand experience of co-creating with students and the community, and created an alternative life skills program for girls who had dropped out of school, allowing them to go from being on the sidelines of the community to agents of change. So one of the first questions I would like to ask our roundtable participants, and I'm going to start with Ranjit Singh, is about mindsets. How do you change mindsets around girls' education?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm incredibly honored to join this this panel of incredible people, especially girls. You're talking about how I changed the parents' mindset working in a rural area. It's very difficult. Let me tell you the fact. In 2009, when I went in my school was sandwiched between cow shed and storeroom. And the girls were not attending schools. Who would like to join such a schools? There I found out very shocking fact was like parents were not, believing in education. That was the root of the problem. So what my personal inception was that the change should not be forced on them. It should be accepted. So I work more on acceptance principle. What exactly I did? Instead of telling them the importance of education, if you do this is going to happen, something like this. Instead of doing that, I started engaging with them and invited girls from nearby villages, those who were educated, those who have got the jobs, doing well in the society, in their work. So the girls were coming to my schools, meeting the parents and telling them, hey, look at me. This is how my life changed just because of education. And at the end of every session, I used to ask a simple question to my parents. Would you like your daughters, your children, be like her? You want your students, your kids to be doing the same thing that you're doing now. Choice is yours. And that was the thing that clicked in their mind, and they made that decision. It was very clear that I'm supporting my daughter to shape her future and make her life much better. So this is how I changed the mindsets.
Thank you. So personal experience on behalf of parents. I think we might have just lost Lamia, but I'll go to Oluwadamilola. How have you managed to change mindsets?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. So for me, in my community, because I grew up on a farmers community, both my parents are farmers, the reality is that once you finish secondary school, that is, if you're lucky to finish secondary school, you're expected to be married off or to just find somebody to marry you. So, however, my parents, even though they did not have, formal education, they've seen how it can be useful. So my parents really supported education. So 5-6 years ago, when I got into social impact, I had to use myself as the standard, as the blueprint of something that is positive, something that education can do for a person. And it means that I have a responsibility to be excellent because I'm trying to sell a story, my story, to parenting community. Because when I go there with social impact project ideas, they won't buy into it if they don't see me as the positive replica of what I'm trying to sell it to them. So one of my earliest projects was on girls education, and then I was in my second year of undergrad law. So I went with my colleagues from class. We were like 7, all girls. And we went to those communities and we told them, look at all of us. In few years, we are going to be lawyers. We will be in powerful positions. And all of us come from these kinds of communities. So education or a better life is not something kept only for the rich and the powerful. So by using ourselves as an example, it gave the parents something to see, and it created a picture of hope in their minds, and that went a long way because the project we had, we designed for them to partake in. Instead of convincing them over and over again, they were the ones signing up like voluntarily, and it changed everything. So for me, this is how I, changed mindsets, using myself as an example, and realizing that I have a responsibility to be the blueprint of the good life for girls in rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So working with parents, changing their mindset, changing mindsets through personal experience. Lamia, over to you. You have been working with government. How do you change their mindsets?
So if I'm being very honest, when we look at institutions as big as governments, we're looking at systemic sort of structures that are in place for such a long time, that a lot of implicit biases, a lot of sort of ways of just doing things, of ways of just governing is so entrenched in like our communities that it becomes really difficult to make any sort of change. A lot of it also just becomes people in positions of power to they're like, okay, we are listening and we're hearing, but then after that there's rarely any follow-up. And that's not just within governments, but even when you're working with larger UN structures of trying to understand, trying to increase girls' education, outreach, or whether it's different initiatives. I've always seen a lot of bureaucratic pushback in terms of what does that change look like. So the work that I did with the government of Pakistan was proposing a policy to help increase access to education for minority girls in Pakistan, including transgender girls in Pakistan who have historically been disadvantaged in the community. So when you're thinking of changing those mindsets, I think one voice is never enough. There needs to be a lot of public pressure, and there needs to be public momentum. And if you think of it in terms of, you know, the country that I come from, it's very slow, which sometimes can feel really frustrating because, you know, there's an urgent need for this action. It's not like, you know, we can wait on it. We cannot, because every time we wait on taking action, we are also losing time that could be spent on educating someone and could literally be spent changing the world. So what I have realized is that governments especially are one of the, like, a lot of the times also we come from countries where there isn't enough money to, you know, to create an infrastructure for those sort of initiatives. When you look at Pakistan with the floods that have recently taken place, you know, education is put on the back burner only because there's a lot of other more pressing needs right now. For example, making sure people are housed. And the thing is, when students start going back to school, we know that boys are going to be given the preference first. You know, after the floods, when the schools are some sort of reconstructed, boys are going to be given the preference to return back to school. So I think putting that pressure on making sure that governments and agencies are rightly making sure that everyone is getting that re-access to school once things go back to normal, which we don't know when that will be. But yeah, there's a lot of pushback, and I think it's just about being resilient and continue fighting the cause.
Yeah, so resilience is something that I think Maggie knows about. And Maggie, another group of stakeholders who we haven't really mentioned is teachers. What about changing their mindsets?
Yeah, I think we really need to see teachers as sort of the bottlenecks in education systems, and we can really think about training teachers, professional development for teachers to help cultivate new mindsets. I mean, teachers were, for the most part, probably students or learners for, let's say, 12 years in systems that might have been conservative, narrow, full of gender bias, patriarchy, full of misogyny, all sorts of things. And then they go through potentially a 2 to 4 year, you know, post-secondary program. And now they're again re-entering a system that they were quite used to as students. In that training that they went through, was it actually transformative? How much did they talk about gender? How much did they talk about unlearning or relearning? What was the feminist lens or frameworks that were brought into that teacher certification program or through ongoing professional development? You know, when I think of like the top graduate schools in education across the world, which one is shouting out at me right now saying, wow, we're known for our feminist teaching pedagogy, for example, right? I don't really know if there's a landmark one, okay? I might know one for STEM. I might know one for arts and creativity. I'm just putting that out there to sort of provoke. But I think we really need to invest in teachers so much in unlearning and relearning and helping them develop, you know, a gender lens or a feminist lens. And that would be such a wonderful investment. In terms of what I did, I was lucky. I studied a master's. I was able to have a lived experience of being a female, but also went to progressive universities where they taught me about gender and feminist, you know, studies and et cetera, and had lots of time to sort of dive deep into this research. So then when I went into the classroom, you know, I took that and I started to have that lens on me when I would talk to my students and listen to them. You know, I would understand, okay, there's structural issues going on here. You know, it would be very, when I was worried about why am I not having any girls come to my, you know, life skills alternative program, right? Where it was designed specifically for kids who had dropped out, et cetera, to help bring them back into the school system. And I'd have 15 boys and just one girl. And so I had to take time, build relationships with girls, get them to feel comfortable to start talking to me, telling me about the issues, making visible to me what was so visible to them, you know, as an issue of why they weren't feeling comfortable in that class. And in that context, it turned out that we needed to create an all-girls space because the girls just didn't feel comfortable in a co-ed space. And I could refer to, you know, some of the previous panelists who opened up this conference talking about school violence, you know, bullying, gender-based violence, et cetera, in classrooms. And that's going to come up sometimes in co-ed spaces, and we simply don't name it or talk about it enough. So in my context, what worked for me is I created a girls only class, and all of a sudden, you know, we increased enrollment by like 500%, right? So it's about definitely, I think, training teachers to have a feminist or gender lens, and then letting them practice that, and also acknowledging that it's really tough. You know, the system always isn't working for you. I'm coming in as a new teacher having to advocate for these changes. They're not coming down from the top. I'm having to change the system above me, right? So acknowledge the work that the teachers are doing to try to make these transformations. It's not easy.
Yeah, and it's something I actually want to come back to in my next question and to dig a little deeper on, because all of you have mentioned, you know, working alongside people, really understanding the context, listening to people. And so I want to just go into this in a bit more detail and think about co-creation and ask you sort of how important is co-creation with these different stakeholders when you're thinking about how to address girls' education issues, specifically in your context. And who do you co-create with? You've mentioned a few. In particular, what roles can the government and teachers and parents and others play? I'd like to come back to you, Lamia, with your example about the government and changing policy. How important is co-creation for you, and how do you do it?
I think in countries where governments have a lot of like sway over the mindsets of people, governments play an extremely important role in when it comes to co-creation, and co-creating spaces which are accessible for all, so inclusive for all identities, but also co-creating curriculums that are, you know, that look at gender as an important aspect. A lot of the times, you know, I can obviously just speak in regards of Pakistan, gender is not put in any lens at all. In fact, there is very little emphasis. Even if there is emphasis, it sort of reinstates very subtly the role of a woman. Like recently there was some, you know, pushback on one of the government textbooks that it was simply just the front cover of the textbook, but it had the father and the son sitting on the couch, and the mother teaching the daughter how to like color, but on the ground, which is very implicit. It's not explicitly stated that, you know, this is how it is, but if you look at how these sort of feed into mindsets, they play a huge role. So co-creating with the government to come up with a strategy that would help increase the amount of girls that believe that education is a right that they do have. And also co-creating with parents. You know, governments play a really big role in ensuring that parents feel safe enough to send their children to school. Parents feel, you know, especially in a lot of conservative backgrounds, parents should feel that their daughter is able to, you know, receive an education that wouldn't sort of threaten them, because at this point just getting them an education is what's really important, and governments play a huge role in creating the infrastructure for it, but also creating the encouragement and the mindset for it. I think in that terms, a lot of governments have a really far way to go, because there's so much that needs to be done about that. But co-creation with government, I think, is one of the most important aspects of increasing girls' education.
Thank you. And on the same question, I'd like to come back to Maggie. You've talked a bit about teachers, but I know that you co-create a lot with students, and I'd love to know a bit about the advantages that you find in doing that.
Well, I mean, I worked in a unique context in the Canadian Arctic. I worked with Indigenous students who were Inuit, and they faced an incredibly high dropout rate. It was over 90 to 95%. And this is due to the legacies of colonization, intergenerational trauma, residential school, genocide, all sorts of very complicated intergenerational traumas that my students were carrying. And I think the only way forward was to really listen to them and then teach with them, co-create with them, find out how I could make school relevant to their reality, right? So in my context, it was dealing a lot with, let's say, socio-emotional regulation. I was working in a suicide crisis. We faced some of the highest suicide rates in the world. It was common for us to lose one student a month to suicide. So it was very grave. It was very in our face. And as such, you know, we had to pivot, you know, as a school to address what these kids were going through and to give them content, you know, that was helping these female male students like in their real and everyday lives. And that can, I know I'm talking kind of big language here, but that can look like, in my case, a running club, you know, recreational activities, cooking program, starting a coffee shop, a catering club with kids, etc. We started a running program, which ended up transforming these kids who were pack-a-day smokers into half marathon runners who would fundraise all year and travel from the Arctic to Hawaii and run a half marathon, and along the way say that it helped them develop skills to help them emotionally regulate all the trauma that they were living through. You know what I mean? And I think that's so important, especially when you take a gender lens to these issues. We know so often the female body, as soon as it hits adolescence and even before, is so subject to the sexual gaze and is so sexualized. And I think that sport and physical activity is a really powerful tool for girls to sort of reclaim their bodies and construct new identities, ones that are strong, healthy, and fit, and that they can see their body as a place to help them regulate all that they're going through, just as an example. But I think the magic for a teacher, in my context, is when you're co-creating both with your students and, in my context, co-creating with my community. So that might be, as mentioned with, by the previous speaker, Lamia, for example, parents, but as well, sometimes your municipality, your mayors, your community councils are very accessible at a teacher level. Me trying to reach my prime minister, that's kind of tough when I've got a heck of a classroom to manage as well. But sometimes I could reach out to the mayor, the elected officials, etc. And when I could also have their support, our projects just flourished, right? So I think it's just wonderful when you can co-create, because as I say, when you run by yourself, you run fast, but when you run with others, you can run so far. And it just creates such sustainability to the projects that you're doing.
Yeah, I think this idea of running with other people is strong, and from the conversations I've had with the rest of you in this group. And Ranjit, we've heard a little bit about intergenerational trauma and how, you know, parents quite often carry some idea of what education should be like, what girls' education should be like, what school should be like for girls. Can you tell me a bit more about how you co-create with parents? Because that's been, I think, a big success of yours.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm, you know, listening to the different experiences of Maggie and Lamia, you know, teaching or education system, when it becomes so much successful, when these key stakeholders like teachers, parents, and students, when these three key pillars work together, they co-create, then the better results can be achieved. So in my context, as I told you, the scenario was like parents were not believing in education, and it reflects the students as well, so they were not enjoying it. So when I went there and I saw that parents are not believing in it, so I set up the three targets before me. The first was to change the parents' indifference toward education. That was the first, like I worked a lot on it. And then second was ensuring every girl child is attending a classrooms. So while co-creating the spaces for girls, the first thing was to build up a relationship with parents. So instead of just, you know, just talking, doing some lectures or the things, I involve parents in my teaching learning process. Let me just give you an example. I set up an alarm on school's building, and it goes ring at 7 p.m. every night. So this was an indication for parents. Now stop working whatever you're doing. Now sit together with your kids and help them to do their homework, ask them what they did in a classroom, something like this. But as these parents were not, you know, aware of this, they didn't know what to do. So in the middle, in the afternoon at 2 p.m. I used to send them text messages. This is what you are expected to do at night. So parent gets to know, oh, this is my duty. This is my responsibility at night. So this is how I created learning space at home as well. Learning doesn't happen in classrooms only. Teachers, students, and parents. This is how the co-creation means to me. And still, after like in last 13 years, this is still going on. So to me, that co-creation, it doesn't, or the better results cannot be achieved just by efforts of a single man. It's a collective efforts. And while working with governments, working with those parents, working with teachers, so all these are actually co-creating some new spaces for themselves. So to me, while we are working with mostly with our students, at the same time, if we focus more on parents, then I think the girls' education or the girls might be getting better opportunities for themselves. Just like take example of one of the panelists. Look at her parents' approach towards her education. They didn't want their girl to get married at 16 or 14. So that's where when parents were educated, parents are educated, they are more aware of it, then girls, achieve their dreams.
Yes, and so back to Oluwadamilola, because you've also been working a lot with parents and the government, so similar to Ranjit Sin and to Lamia. What's it been like in your context, the process of co-creation?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So the project that I planned with my team, the idea was because we saw a channel between poverty and students going out of school. So Nigeria right now, according to UNICEF, is in the top 5 of countries with the highest rate of out of school children. That is over 20 million. And a larger percentage of this number are girls. So we had an idea that we wanted to get this kids off the streets, how they do child labor during school hours. I think that wasn't good enough. But then during the project implementation, we realized that the problem is not just, lack of love for education or no, not because they didn't want education, but because of poverty. Why? We had partnerships with some schools to take some of the students on scholarship. But then the parents will go back to withdraw those kids from school so that those kids can sell, farm produce and goods and help in raising money for the family. So we saw that the problem was poverty. If we can find a way to empower the parents, to make the parents financially strong, then they will no longer need the children for child labor. And by the way, child labor is a crime in Nigeria, but sometimes there are laws, but there are no implementation mechanisms. So the project was that we got parents, mostly mothers, because they were the ones that showed more interest, and we got them to sign up for free skill acquisition classes, which was on sewing and sustainable fashion. So we got professionals who volunteered as trainers. They trained the parents, and then we raised money to support each parent who signed up for the training with funding to start up their business. So we placed the project on a 3-month monitoring and evaluation to measure the before and after, to see the amount of financial empowerment the family had and how it's translated to them being able to ensure that their children stays in school. So instead of pulling that child out of school when the child have no resources to buy textbook or to pay for lunch money or to buy pen or all that necessary materials in school, now the parents were empowered. They have money now, and instead of pulling their kids out of school, rather they were able to pay for those little expenses that are necessary for their children. And this for me is co-creation, because as social workers, if you're creating an idea or a project, you have a perfect idea in your head, but the idea may not be functional. It may not be usable in the particular community. So there is a necessity to ensure that you involve the proposed target audience in your creation process. If not, your idea will become useless. It will not be implementable, and then it defeats the essence of the whole thing. So we had, and how we got to the communities, that we partnered with local communities. So in Nigeria, we have this thing called the Market Women's Square, We call them Iyaloja. That's a Yoruba word for women of the market. So they are like leaders in the communities, and they gave us like access to this, our target audience, young women who are mothers who still have, you know, the strength to work but did not have a source of income generation. So we tackled the problem from the root, which was poverty, and the impact was tremendous. In fact, some of the students are currently my juniors. I'm in my final year, and some of the students who benefited are in their first year. So when I go to classes and I see them, it gives me so much pride. This is a project that began as far back as 2017, and it was still like, you know, we do batches every year to keep up. So creation is very, very important in social impact projects, so that, you know, the savior complex of social impact workers does not overrule the impact that is supposed to be. So you don't come like a savior, whereas the people that are supposed to benefit are not benefiting. And by co-creating, we've seen tremendous success in our project, even scaling from one community to the other. We've gone to like 7 communities, and it's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you. There's a tiny bit of feedback from your mic, but I'd like to stick with you for the next question, if it's okay. We've talked about poverty being a big problem, but also many of you work in contexts where violence and safety are issues that girls face. We've talked about this a little bit, but it's important, I think, from our previous conversations, I understand that responses need to be trauma informed and focus on wellness. So could you tell us a bit more about what this means for your work? Oluwadamilala, I'll stick with you.
Thank you so much. So I have a personal experience with violence in campus. In 2018, I was attacked on my campus with a machete. And as a law student, you know, you have all the theoretical knowledge of laws in your head, but then it dawns on you that implementation is almost, you know, non-visible, is a mirage. Because I remember then in 2018, I tried to report, and to my greatest shock, I realized that for the first time, you know, crimes, gender-based crimes committed on campuses were classified as a misdemeanor, not even a crime worthy of, you know, being tried in the courts and everything. And it's just showed to me the first time the realities of gender-based violence. Now, there's a difference between having head knowledge and being a victim of a phenomena. And head knowledge is not enough. Anybody can have head knowledge, but it doesn't mean that you have to be a victim for you to understand the dynamics of this issue. So one of the things my team did was we started creating like groups in clusters across campuses. Young students who had gone through, you know, gender-based violence on campus coming together to have conversations and to demystify the harshness around these things. You know, people don't want to talk about rape on campus, and then the victim blaming that also affects, you know, victims, not only young women, even men, because, you know, victim does not have violence is not particular to a gender, even though women take a larger percentage of the victim spectrum. So we created a project, and we started engaging, you know, leaders in the school, management, some of the IE officials in the management, and then we partnered with the arts department, because we know that, you know, art and creativity is a powerful tool for storytelling to get information. How we wrote a script, and it was reenacted to show the realities of young women as to violence in campus and how this contributes to the reduction in the rate of young women, you know, girls being enrolled in school. And luckily, should I say gratefully, that one action set in motion a review process of a 20-year-old law, the Student School Code of Conduct, and now rape, sexual assault is a crime. And then there is a panel set forth in my school where if you report, the case will be handed over to the police and officially taken up. Now, violence on campuses or violence in the school areas has been one of the major factors that ensured young girls do not enroll in school. And sometimes I do not blame the parents, because we live in a very cultured society. And knowing that their children or their girls are exposed to danger, they tend to withdraw them. In their own minds, that is a way to keep them safe. But on the long run, it translates to inequality, because education is a tool to empower someone's life. And when that education is taken away, the young girl grow up into a woman with no backing, with no support, with no stability on her own in our society. So as a person, I am with my team, creating avenues to demystify those conversations, because we still have a society that thrives on victim blaming. And so, because I remembered my own experiences when I reported, I was faced with, oh, why were you walking alone? What were you wearing? Where were you going? And all those very questions that sound, they sound very innocent, but they're very dangerous, because they silence people from, speaking out, and perpetrators thrive in those silence. So by creating safe spaces for conversation, we have, successfully bridged that gap. At least it's made my school a bit safer, and with the support of partnerships with major organizations in Nigeria, we're looking to expand to other schools. I am a grassroots worker, maybe because I grew up in a very rural community. I build from ground up. If we try a project in the community and it's successful, then there is a possibility of replication on a larger scale. And this is what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that very personal experience with us. I know that kind of sharing is not easy, and I'm really sorry that that's something that you've experienced. I know, Maggie, that this is something also that your students have experienced, many of them, and it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about how you address this and what it means for your work.
Yeah, there's sort of two stories that are coming to mind. I guess one, just to give people an idea of like the very real challenge that it is to sometimes talk about these issues in school. Again, I worked in a context where there was a lot of gender-based violence. There was also a lot of sexual-based violence, and many of our young students were at risk of or had survived sexual assault. And we had an incredible elder in our community, a female elder who herself had survived being molested as a child and had gone through a lot of that trauma, and it manifested in all sorts of harmful ways in her life. And then she got to a place of what she would describe as healing, and she had, let's say, healed herself. And then she was an incredible counselor, support, voice, champion, comforter for other people who were, and protector for other people who were at risk or who had also survived a sexual assault. And she was very passionate about helping kids at the school know about what sexual assault is, know how to protect themselves, know how to bring voice to those issues. And she ran a program called Good Touch, Bad Touch, which was a very sort of child-friendly program to help talk about these issues with young kids. So here she is, a respected elder in our community, like a grandma to many kids, a great grandmother, a grandaunt, a mother, very well revered. And yet when she would schedule to come to our school to do her presentations, which were obviously so valued and so contextual, we're now bringing into the school not just curriculum about, you know, how the Egyptian pyramids were built. We're talking about real things that the kids really need to learn right now. And we would often get death threats at the school. We would get calls in about somebody who was going to bring a gun to the school if this elder came and spoke, et cetera, et cetera. So I just share that story to show how complicated it can be, how sensitive, how much of a threat it still is, even sometimes for elders, for leaders to bring voice, you know, to these issues within a school setting, and how much as a school, you know, we need to navigate these spaces. So I just share that. But what I also want to share, I guess, in my teacher lens, is that when I think about neuroscience, you know, I know from neuroscience or brain development studies that when a child or an adult is not safe, I say that their brain is like, it's like frozen, you know, the executive functioning part of the brain that we use for reasoning and, you know, learning language and vocabulary and like logic and recognizing patterns, all that, it's frozen. It's either in, you know, fight, flight, or freeze. Just like if you've suddenly been, you know, attacked in a situation or pickpocketed, in that moment, you might fight, flight, or freeze, right? If you're unsafe, your brain goes into that lockdown. It tries to keep you safe. It's not really interested in learning about Egyptian pyramids at that moment, right? And yet so many of our female students walk into schools that are not safe, right? Might not always be very visible to some people because we don't have our gender or feminist glasses on, but it is visible to them whether they have the language or not to express it. And their brains are not always open, right, to all the learning that we're trying to give them. So even though those girls may now be in that classroom, I always encourage people to think about whether that space right now, whether that teacher can hold that space that is welcoming, you know, safe, full of love and full of encouragement, so that female student can really open her brain, you know, take it out of fight, flight, fright, you know, open it up so that she can absorb all that there is to learn at that school. And I think the key to that, and research will say to that, the key to that is having a positive, strong relationship with a teacher. And from a system level, I really think we need to give teachers more time during their professional day to really build these positive and safe relationships with all students, girl students, but across the board, of course, to create these positive and safe spaces for them, because they can physically be in the class, but if they're worried about bullying, gender harassment, what's going to happen at recess, after school, if there's an ex-boyfriend in that class with them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a perpetrator of violence, et cetera, if there's somebody else on campus that they're worried about, you know, that's affecting their brain at that point. And so we really need to create welcoming and safe spaces.
We do, and it's something that I want to ask Lamia to comment on. This idea of female students walking into schools that are not safe, as you say, and the threat of threats. Lamia, we're nearly out of time, but I know that you've said to me that, you know, minority girls in Pakistan face opposition to their education, are in constant danger. Could you, just for 1 minute, because we're almost out of time, tell us a little bit about how you work with that?
Very quickly, just to so one of the main you know, sort of inequality spaces for transgender girls in Pakistan, and in 2018, I believe, there was like sweeping legislation that was passed that would, you know, help protect the rights of transgender women, etc. But recently there has been speculation that those legislations will be pushed back or pulled back, which shows that, you know, there's still opposition being faced, and there's quite literally, you know, safety is at huge risk. The way that solutions have been trying to be found is by creating all transgender girl schools and try to create a space that is inclusive, but and that feels safe. But even then, there's so much that needs to be done. So I think creating inclusive spaces that would only include them would be a good first step before completely, you know, doing co-ed schools.
Thank you. And we are out of time, and I know there's some closing remarks, but I would like to ask each of you on this topic to give me your 20-second closing idea that you would like our audience to go away with. Ranjit, in 20 seconds from you, what should we be thinking?
Yeah, I'll not take much time. So ensure girls have equal access to technology and resources. They need to learn effectively, and ensure safe spaces, empowering spaces for learning, including online or offline learning. So I think we need to build those, you know, digital skills through the gender bias free teaching learning process. And everyone, like teachers, communities, government, should work together so that we could ensure that every girl is learning.
Thank you. Oluwademilola, 20 seconds from you, final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Leonora. So for me, gender equality is not an abstract term. So when we're talking about empowering women and girls, we should always see it on a broad perspective, not just getting young girls to school. How do we empower their parents so that they can be, strong, confident members of the society who are involved in the decision making of that society? Because the truth is, if we're just looking at getting girls into school and we're not talking about equality in legislation making, equality in leadership, then we're just, it's like cutting one head of a hydra. It will grow back and it will grow double. So our solution should be intersectional and our solution should be inclusive. Thank you.
Intersectional and inclusive. Thank you. Lamia, what do you think?
I just want to add on too, because this is what I was going to say, that I think solutions need to be intersectional. It is also understanding that within the spectrum of, women identifying folks that we were talking about, there are certain intersections of identity that do make it more difficult for particular individuals. And I think that is something that goes under the radar really often. A lot of the times when governments are reporting their statistics of, wow, we got girls into schools, they do not talk about the fact that what was their focus on girls that come from minority backgrounds or that come from marginalized communities. So we need to look at not using an umbrella term when we're talking about girls' education and focusing on, the intersectional identities that go along with being a girl and how those need to be more inclusive in our reporting as well, and in terms of our government planning as well.
Thank you. And Maggie, final words.
Teachers matter. They're so important to the education system. And I hope, my wish would be that every teacher, to draw upon a keyword that just came out of this last little wrap up, could see themselves, as an intersectional feminist and bring that lens into their classroom. I think we would be well on our way to building a beautiful place. So teachers matter. Don't forget teacher training, professional development, keep at it. They're so important. And they're the bottleneck to the future.
Thank you. We have really whistled through an awful lot in 45 minutes, and I'm so grateful to all of these roundtable members. I'm sure that the organisers will be able to share ways of getting in touch with them if you have more questions. But I would like to introduce Konstantinos Doukas, who is the President and Trustee of School of the Future International Academy, who will be delivering the closing remarks of this event. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Eleonora, and I really appreciate the last 20 seconds elevator pitch for your whole, group discussion. I think it was very clever and very good what you did. Great job, and teachers matter. I totally agree. Teachers matter, especially we should never stop giving opportunities for professional development for teachers, because that's where everything starts from. So hi to you all. It's always a pleasure to do the closing remarks, but it's always very difficult to make a presentation after students, and students' voice so powerful, so clear, so true. So my job has become a bit more difficult to try to narrow down in this great summit and all these nice comments and presentations that we heard. I will try to make this summary as more powerful and effective as possible. I will go now to share my screen. Do you see my screen? Message from the team. Great. So when we started doing the Bridge the Gap, and it was the idea that came up in 2019, and we started in 2020, we could never imagine how strong and the big demand for participation and these excellent people who are supporting our scope and our effort. So we're very proud of that. And but on the other hand, we're very sorry and sad because this year we don't have with us one of our co-founders, a person that supported Bridge the Gap, a person that he gave his whole heart to Sofia. And his name is Dino Kiritsis. And he was one of our best colleagues in the team, which unfortunately we lost a couple of months ago. So we decided to do Bridge the Gap 2022 in his memory. And I'm sure that his heart is still with us. And I hope that his vision and his internal strength will always be with us in order to continue the vision of Sofia. I will start from the plenary sessions and the main presentations. First, we define the problem, where Pauline Rose made a great presentation. She talked about the sustainable development of goals that include educational targets, both for girls and boys, through lifelong learning and inclusivity, diversity, and gender equality. And she also showed us a very nice diagram and a very nice picture that I kept like this for your future reference, because I believe that the examples that you can read in there very easily present what the barriers are and what on the girls that they face globally. So we do have gender parity that improving, and we need to go beyond the basic numbers, Pauline said, and we should check more the qualitative attributes. Especially for girls, you know, that we do have a more risk on gender-based violence. And we know that especially for young women is more likely to face discriminations in their work opportunities. At her closing remark, Pauline gave us a very positive point of view, because she said that we do see quality, you know, there's been a lot of work done, and we see making this reality, you know, of progress. So that was a really positive remark, and I hope that also Bridge the Gap 2022 is putting a little piece on this progress in girls' education. Then we had the pleasure of listening to Antara giving us her remarks on tackling gender stereotypes. It's really amazing. In 1916, women should not vote, and in 1950, on a very progressive US universities, women could not study, or should not study sciences. So let's put more effort on how we can use education in tackling gender stereotypes. She also said about how much gender stereotypes affect kids' development and psychology, and also affects their behavior in their adult lives. It's something that they carry with them in their adult lives. And she closed by saying that it's very useful if we try to put students on identifying the reality of gender's roles, and how important is the mother, how important is the father, the difference of the roles, and their impact in society. Then we had Susannah Hares talking about school violence and giving us very important data. But she mentioned that we still need to collect more quality data on school violence. It's essential if we are to understand the prevalence of school violence. She also mentioned that we do still have in many countries around the world unacceptable ways of punishment. And that's a mistake, because that's keep on going the same problem. We need to keep kids in school and feed them. So financial barriers prevent many children, especially girls, from attending school, because the parents will choose them to work or to get married and get out of the house and don't create any more financial barriers and financial burden. And she also mentioned that we need to generate better evidence on what works to eliminate violence. So we have these great best practices, and we can prove how to eliminate violence. This will be very helpful. And we need to get the education sector to care more. So we need to ring the bell, shout out loud, and put the education sector to care more about preventing violence in schools. And then we had Alexa presenting an amazing presentation about things that we we think we know, but we realize when we see the numbers. And in a world where computer science needs to become more diverse, we only have 18% of women taking computer science degrees at undergraduate, both in the United States and Europe. And in times where technical skills are more important than ever, and students want to jumpstart their lives, their careers with hands-on experiences and make their resume stand out within demand, there's a great computer science curriculum challenge because many countries around the world don't have a computer science curriculum. And we do need to have students developing computational thinking. It's compulsory. It's needed for boys and girls for their future employment and life and business lives. So, as Alexa said, new challenges create possibilities for skilled graduates, and the rapidly changing tech landscape opens doors for student applicable certifications. So what we see now is that certificates are becoming more important and are challenging the traditional diploma path. So we need, as educators, to help our students get their certificates and stand out to the job market. So we need to use all these tools that are out there in order for our students to get their certificates and get very useful soft skills. And then we moved over to this amazing roundtable with teachers and students, where we heard that in many areas around the world, girls do not have equal access to education and are deprivileged in comparison with boys. There are many reasons that this happen: early marriage, stereotypes of women's future roles, division of household labor, safety in school, going back and forth to school. Girls are more afraid if the school is not safe or the path to the school is not safe. And she also, the whole panel described how we know that if girls get the right education, it's likely less to marry young, and it's very possible to lead a healthy, productive life and high income and participate in decisions that affects them and contribute to the whole society. The whole society is more stable and resilient if we have this kind of a balance on women's presence and women's voice. So how do we change the mindset of parents in the society in order to help bridge the gap in girls' education? Three ideas that we got is that we have to use role examples of successful educated girls. We can also use our strong voice, all of us, but we also need governmental initiatives. We need the government to support these initiatives or create new ones in order to bridge the gap. And of course, we need trained teachers who will always have continuous self-development and involvement on helping bridge the gap in girls' education. Co-creation, extremely useful. We heard that if you go alone, you go faster. If we go together, we go further. So let's go together. Teachers, principals, families, government. We can all support the different kind of initiatives that are, or create new ones around the world in order to co-create ways of bridging the gap for girls' education. I like that very much that it was mentioned on the roundtable. Education is the most powerful tool to make the change and solve the gap on girls' education. That's true. That when we hear about and we listen about educated people, the gap in girls' education is much smaller. So we have to use this powerful tool in order to help this problem be solved. From Sophia's point of view, we do know that girls' rights education are human rights, and this highly involves also men in the effort to preserve them. And there is no doubt that due to collective effort and effective initiatives, we have globally made great progress. And we're happy for this progress. But there is still a lot more to do. We need to make sure that girls are not just graduating, but also getting to the workforce. We have to be sure that girls worldwide have access to technology and have developed basic IT skills, because that's an accelerator for their work for the work and for the future. Support local education leaders in addressing and solving the problem, and put a lot of effort to develop fewer formal ways of education that can be exploited by girls. So if we have different ways and platforms and tools that girls can get educated, then the percentage of girls who are getting educated will become more, because it can be more easily addressed and used. Sophia's vision is that no student is left behind, that all children around the world, both girls and boys, have access to quality education and can achieve their goals and dreams. And that's why we make this World Summit. So we do believe that we should support girls' rights to equal and quality education, and we believe it's a major importance, not just for us in Sofia, but for many people around the world. So we should invest in that. And we, from Sofia, we set ourselves at the disposal of school leaders, policymakers, and initiatives worldwide to work together for providing girls equal opportunities and access to quality education. This is an open call for the global education community. Let's all join forces. Let's do it. Let's help girls around the world get educated and have a better life. I thank you all for participating in Bridge the Gap 2022 and contributing, making our schools a better place for our students. Thank you all.